Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Jamie's Law Press Conference. We're going to start in another minute, but I just wanted to welcome all the press onto the call with us this morning. And if you have a question, we are going to try to get to those towards the end of the press conference. There's a couple different ways that you can submit that by either writing it in the chat or raising your hand. We'll try to get to those again at the end, but please feel free to begin submitting those now. I'd like to turn it over this morning, if I could, to Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz. Congresswoman?
Yes, thank you all for joining us. We have a really stellar roster of speakers and a busy day ahead of us in Washington, so I want to quickly jump right in. We all see the startling resurgence in mass gun violence in recent weeks, and as mass gatherings resume after the pandemic, I think we all fear it may get worse. Gun violence sadly didn't go away with the lockdown. In fact, once again, 2020 saw nearly 40,000 people die from guns. More than 100,000 others were wounded in the crossfire, and hundreds of thousands more were traumatized by harm and loss. 2021 and 2022 will be no different unless we do something about it. And that's why we're here. Like others on this call, my heart was torn open 3 years ago when 17 innocent lives were stolen in the Marjory Stoneman Douglas shooting in Parkland. One of those victims, Jamie Guttenberg, lost her life that Valentine's Day, and her father, Fred, vowed to do all he could to stop guns from taking more young lives. Fred has become a friend, and I know I've heard him say so many times that he wishes that he didn't know any of us, and in a way we do too. He joins us today to help describe a bill named in his daughter's honor. It's legislation that helps attack this problem in a holistic way, not just by addressing guns, but also ammunition sales. We'll also hear from others impacted by this scourge and people devoted to ending it. We'll start with Senator Blumenthal, who's been hard at work on this ammunition component to gun safety for many years. Senator Blumenthal?
Thanks so much, Debbie. Your leadership has been so extraordinary, and I really want to thank you, as well as Ted Deutch, who is a steadfast champion of common sense measures against gun violence, and of course our colleagues Joe Neguse and Lucy McBath, who will be joining us. You have provided such tremendous leadership in the House, and we hope to emulate it now in the Senate, and we have a path forward. In fact, there are several paths forward on background checks, on red flag statutes, measures that make common sense, and now background checks on ammunition. I want to pay particular tribute to Fred Guttenberg, who's championing this measure, has been just an example of grace under pressure, tremendous courage and compassion. To read, again, as I did preparing for this press conference, what he said about his daughter at her funeral is to be inspired forever. And his activism, along with the March for Our Lives young people and Chris Brown of Brady, they are the ones who are really energizing and empowering this movement against gun violence. To impose background checks on purchases of ammunition is really the epitome of common sense. And it's the reason why 6 states impose such background check requirements now in effect. Connecticut is one of them, requiring a background check for a license that is required to buy ammunition. Let me reassure everybody who has any questions, there is no infringement on the Second Amendment. It's well within Heller. There is no inconvenience involved. The purchase of ammunition is seamless and quick for people who are law-abiding. And the point is to keep ammunition as well as guns out of the hands of people who are dangerous to themselves or others. It's the reason why I've championed the red flag statute federally, such as Florida and Connecticut have on their books now. Florida passed their red flag statute after Parkland as a reaction, and I'm continuing to work for it. But keeping instruments of war and death out of the hands of people who are in crisis, people who are threatening and imminently risky to themselves or others, whether it's suicide or the kind of mass shooting that we saw in Parkland and again in Indianapolis, makes common sense. In fact, Congress is complicit if it fails to approve such measures. Connecticut has shown that it can save lives. So have the other states that have adopted these measures. And I am very grateful to be on this call. We are going to be inspired by it to work for Jamie's Law, make it a matter of the law of the land, and make sure that we use it to save lives. And I might just close on this note. There's no single solution here. There's no panacea. And with all these measures, effective enforcement is critical. For anybody to say, taking Indiana, well, these laws don't work because the shooter was able to get a gun and ammunition, even though his shotgun was taken away. Effective enforcement is the key. The lack of enforcement and resources will hobble and impede any law, and we owe it to our law enforcement authorities and to the laws that we pass to make sure that they are real and effective, and that law enforcement has the resources and authorities they need to effectively enforce it. So thank you all for being on this call, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to join you in this critically important cause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. One thing I think it's important to underscore is that it is already against federal law to purchase ammunition if you meet any of the provisions in the law that would prohibit you from purchasing a gun. The only thing that's missing is enforcement. And with that, I really want to just tell you how much it means to me to be able to work with and honor Fred Guttenberg, honor his beautiful daughter, Jamie, and to have been able to work with him over the last few years and to have found a friend for life. Fred?
Thank you. Listen, I've gotten to know all of you, and to say I appreciate you all would be an understatement, because while not everybody in Washington, D.C. is fighting for this, you all are. My name is Fred Guttenberg. I'm the father of Jesse and Jamie Guttenberg. And as you know, my daughter was murdered in the Parkland school shooting in 2018. But I want you all to remember my son, Jesse, who lives with the scars of that shooting every day. Because these shootings aren't just about those that we bury. It's about every other American who lives with the scars of what happened that we don't always remember as much. My wife, Jen, my son, Jesse, and I should be watching Jamie live out her best senior year right now, getting ready to graduate, attend a prom, and go to college. But instead, we're watching as others are living out these milestones, and we're wondering, why haven't we done anything about gun violence yet? Why? You know, in 2018, after Jamie was killed, when I first met Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz, and we discussed the idea of the background checks on ammunition, at that time, and it's just 3 years ago, the estimate of weapons on the streets of America was about 300 million. That number now is about 400 million. More weapons with no new safeguards leads to predictable and inevitable outcomes. And that is more dead Americans. We're watching this play out every single day. We can't turn away from the television without news of the latest mass shooting. It's fitting that today, when we reintroduce Jamie's Law, that it's actually 22 years since the shooting in Columbine, 22 years of doing nothing to save lives from gun violence. This isn't going to solve itself, and we're seeing the reality of this on our streets. We are better than this. Today is the day that we say enough. Enough dead Americans, enough with the mass shootings, enough of doing nothing. Today is the day where we need to address the reality of our prior failures by dealing with the reality of 400 million weapons on our streets already. And the only way to do that is Jamie's Law. The only way to do that is to extend background checks to ammunition. It is the only way to deal with the reality of our prior failures and to save lives immediately from the weapons that are already on the streets. If we fail, the outcome will be predictable. It will be inevitable. It will be a continuing cycle of escalating gun violence and dead Americans. We are better than this. We need to be better than this. Let's get Jamie's Law passed. Again, I truly thank you all for doing this with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fred. Thank you so much to you and to Jen and Jesse for being the incredible advocates in the face of the pain that I know you deal with every single day. Next, it's always bittersweet to introduce my friend Lucy McBath, particularly when we're talking about dealing with gun violence. She lost her beautiful son Jordan to gun violence and has been a champion ever since that gut-wrenching loss. Lucy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and thank you so much, Fred. And I'm just always grateful to be with my fighting family. I call you my family alongside me as we continue to fight to make our communities safer. And, my son Jordan was killed when he was killed, and long before I actually became a member of Congress, I had been working with Fred, of course, with Fred, and he'd been very, very supportive of me. Both of us were working as survivors and advocates to pass common sense legislation that we know is going to save numerous American lives. And, our work is deeply rooted in the fight to prevent the violence and heartbreak that forever changed our own families, our own lives, our own communities. Those communities in Sandy Hook and Parkland, and those kinds of tragedies that devastated the families of Ahmaud Arbery and Trayvon Martin, and that took my own son from me, Jordan Davis. And over the past couple of months, we've continued to see with terrifying frequency just how much pain gun violence brings to our community and brings to our country. And Americans are just simply no longer going to accept the empty words and the hollow gestures that we hear over and over again. We're so sorry for your loss. We'll be praying for your loved ones. I know that faith without works is dead. So faith without action does nothing to stop our communities from being ripped apart. And faith without action does nothing to protect our children while they're in school, simply learning how to read and write. We know that faith without action does nothing to stand up for Americans everywhere who deserve to go about their daily lives without fear. And we know that universal background checks and every piece of legislation, Jamie's Law, all of these pieces of legislation really, really help to save lives. Likewise, ensuring that everyone who buys ammunition also passes a background check. This helps to keep us all so much more safe. It's another piece of just really common sense legislation that prevents families from knowing the pain of losing a loved one to gun violence. Because as we've said over and over and over again, no one deserves to ever feel this kind of loss and pain. Jamie's Law is for families like ours, for families like mine, for families like the Guttenbergs, and for families across the country who are just terrified that one day they're going to send their children off to school and they're not going to return home. This law, Jamie's Law, is for humanity. It is for compassion. It is for making sure that each and every one of our children, every one of our loved ones has the ability to live in the fullness of their lives, in their fullness as American citizens. And I'm so grateful to be a part of this legislation, to be a part of supporting this phenomenal piece of policy that truly will make a difference.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Congresswoman McBath. Thank you for the incredible leadership that you have shown since joining the Congress, and especially since the loss of your beloved son. It's just been a true honor to be able to become your friend. I want to add a few words, and then we'll continue to move through our speakers. I've devoted my entire public life to keeping people safe. That's been the centerpiece of my legislative agenda throughout my career. And I know that the way we effectively do that is no secret. Whether it's pool safety, internet predators, or fighting COVID, we create layers of protection. So if one safety measure fails, another is there to catch our fall. Gun violence is quintessentially that type of public health problem. We will never solve it with a single piece of legislation. It will take, as President Biden recently made clear, a whole of government effort. That's what Jamie's Law does. It provides another layer of protection, and one that is quick, easy to comply with, and doesn't place an undue burden on citizens. So how do we get there? This Congress, the House has already passed bipartisan background checks legislation, which will close the gun show loophole and ensure that abusive partners and stalkers can't easily get a hold of guns. And Jamie's Law is another vital piece of a multifaceted approach to ending the gun violence epidemic in America. The devastating physical damage inflicted by a gunshot is the result of the firearm used and the ammunition fired. Without ammunition, firearms are no more dangerous than any blunt object. In many respects, federal law treats firearms and ammunitions the same way, as I mentioned. Any individual that is prohibited from purchasing guns is also prohibited from purchasing ammunition. That's current law. Yet while ammunition is every bit as necessary for the operation of a weapon as the firearm itself, federal law does not require a background check to prevent prohibited purchasers from acquiring ammunition. Jamie's Law will close this ammo loophole by requiring background checks for ammunition purchases. Nearly 40,000 people die from guns in the US every year. That's 4 people every hour whose dreams are snatched away by a gun and a bullet, each lost leaving a trail of sorrow and pain for friends and family to navigate for a lifetime. I know the challenge seems daunting. I'm always asked, well, it's never been able to be passed before. None of these gun bills have ever been able to be passed before. So how are you going to do this one? Nearly all Americans want reforms, and it's elected Republicans who are chained to the gun lobby. But at various points, securing universal suffrage and an 8-hour workday or ending segregation all but seemed impossible. So how do we do it? We follow the proven path that African American, Hispanic, and women civil rights leaders have charted before us. For starters, we keep pushing Senate and House Republicans, calling, emailing, picketing, protesting, and voting. These are the nonviolent weapons of democracy that we have at hand, and they can make the difference. It's all that ever has. We just have to ratchet up the public cost for politicians who choose allegiance to the NRA over keeping our communities safe. Second, we as lawmakers can make it more politically painful inside the halls of Congress. Returning to a talking filibuster would be a start. If Senator Cruz wants to read from a phone book on the Senate floor while innocent people perish, let's run that split screen on national TV for every American to see. If Senator Cotton wants to stand for a whole day yammering in the well, all while 100 Americans take their last breath over that same time due to a gunshot wound, let him do it. But let's make them do it. And finally, we have to keep building a movement. As we've been doing, we've built a powerful coalition in support of Jamie's Law. That's on top of the millions of Americans who are at work every day to get gun safety measures passed. We need to build on that movement every day. Some of our work has been done. 4 years ago, Congress and the White House was controlled by Republicans, but Americans mobilized and Democrats won it all back. Now let's build on those wins and make our nation stronger and safer. And so I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Congressman Ted Deutch, whose district, Parkland, is in. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School is in his district. He understands and has been a vital and critical leader in accomplishing, at least making sure that we can raise awareness and push this boulder up the mountain and help us pass Jamie's Law and so many other important gun safety measures. Ted, thank you so much for joining us and for your leadership.
Thanks so much, Debbie. Thank you for calling this together. Thank you for introducing this important legislation. Thanks for your leadership and thanks for your friendship. It's good to be with you and Senator Blumenthal and our colleague and friend, Representative McBath, Chris Brown, and Fred. The reason that we're all here today is that Jamie Guttenberg should be here today. And every day, every day I stand in awe of the strength of my friend Fred, who is leading this effort in memory of his daughter Jamie, and who brings a straightforward and a powerful voice to the gun safety debate in this country. I'm so honored to call Fred my constituent, friend, and frequent collaborator in our efforts to make our communities safer, and I'm so glad to join this effort that Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz and Fred are leading. What we're asking for today is simple. We just want our gun laws to make sense. Right now, people who are prohibited by federal law from possessing or purchasing a firearm are also prohibited from possessing or purchasing ammunition. That makes sense. But what doesn't make sense is that we don't even check if someone is prohibited from purchasing ammunition when they buy it. Closing this glaring loophole is one of the very least things that we could do to save lives. Mass shooters are acquiring hundreds of rounds of ammunition to carry out these horrific attacks on our schools, our grocery stores, our workplaces, our movie theaters, churches, synagogues, mosques, and every time someone buys a bullet is an opportunity for law enforcement to check that ammunition isn't going to end up in the headlines the next morning because of another mass shooting, another intimate partner murder, another suicide, another of the 40,000 gun violence tragedies in this country every single year. As Fred pointed out, today marks 22 years since the shooting at Columbine. In those 22 years, we have lost so many lives. We have seen so many communities torn apart by this trauma over and over again, just over the past several weeks. Again, we need to fix our gun laws. The time is now. The House passed H.R. 8 to expand the background check system for firearms, but that's just not enough. Jamie's law should be on the House floor just behind it, and then through the Senate, and then to President Biden's desk. And when it feels like we can't go a day without a mass shooting in this country, it's time to treat this like the emergency that it is, the screaming emergency that it is. I'm so proud to support my friend and neighbor, Representative Wasserman Schultz and Senator Blumenthal today, two great leaders in this fight against the scourge of gun violence. We're going to work hard to get this bill moving along with other pieces of the gun safety agenda. We have waited too long. We need action. We need action. And we need these bills signed into law. Debbie, thanks so much. It's great to be with all of you.
Thank you so much, Ted. Again, thank you for your leadership. And I want to just underscore, we're not going away. We're not going away, and this is a group of relentless individuals, and we are joined by millions of relentless individuals who will not stop until we accomplish making sure that we can keep people safe from gun violence. And one of the foremost leading organizations to achieve that is the Brady campaign to end gun violence. And Kristin Brown has joined us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, and thank you for sponsoring Jamie's Law. Thank you, Senator Blumenthal, for your leadership for this cause for so many years, and for pushing Jamie's Law in the Senate, and obviously for your leadership, Congressman Deutch. It's a pleasure to be here and to join Fred, an amazing and fierce advocate, father of Jamie and Jesse, and someone like too many Americans in this country whose voice has been forced to be lifted because we have not taken the comprehensive actions that we need to take to address what is, as President Joe Biden said in the Rose Garden almost 2 weeks ago, a public health epidemic. And it's really that simple. We lose 40,000 people a year to gun violence in this country. And this is a uniquely American epidemic. To solve that epidemic, we need comprehensive solutions that are entirely consistent with the Second Amendment. And we have leaders now in Congress, in the House of Representatives, and in the Senate who will not take no for an answer, and who understand this is not about thoughts and prayers. This is about action. So I'm so pleased to be able to support moving forward and advancing the kind of common sense, straightforward measure that is found in Jamie's Law. And I want to say, as the president of Brady, Jim and Sarah Brady fought for many years to enact the Brady background check system. Their chief opponent throughout that entire history was the National Rifle Association, saying this won't work. It's a system that will be full of holes, and this violates Second Amendment rights. These are the same kinds of arguments we hear today. Here's the thing, though. Since the Brady law was enacted, it has prevented approximately 4 million prohibited gun transactions. In 2017 alone, nearly 650 prohibited gun transactions were prevented every single day. In short, background checks work, and expanding them is something the American people want. Jamie's Law builds on that successful track record and closes a glaring loophole in the existing law. Currently, when an individual goes to purchase a firearm at a licensed dealer, that dealer runs a Brady background check to see if that purchaser is prohibited from buying a gun. The same law that prohibits certain people from buying guns applies to ammunition too. Yet if that person went to buy only ammunition, no background check is performed. No questions are asked. The legislation, Jamie's Law, closes that loophole, helping to ensure that if a prohibited person is somehow able to get a gun, they won't be able to easily obtain ammunition. It is in keeping with the successful legacy of the Brady background check system. And frankly, it's consistent with what American people want. Over 80% of Americans want universal background checks on gun sales. These are common sense safety measures, and the American people recognize that. The same measures should extend to ammunition sales to stop prohibited persons from acquiring and amassing ammunition. And we know the sense of urgency. Everyone has talked about that. Brady estimates that there were 20.6 million firearm sales in 2020. That's a 64% increase over the 12.6 million estimated sales in 2019. Particularly when we are still working to close loopholes on gun sales, prohibited individuals have access to firearms like ghost guns. Without closing this loophole on ammunition, it makes it possible for those who should be prohibited from accessing a deadly weapon to not only possess one, but also amass ammunition to accompany it. That's clearly not what the American public wants or what our laws intended. Jamie's Law, again, builds on a system that works. It's a common sense solution, and Brady is so proud to support it and work to ensure that it's passed and signed by Joe Biden into law. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all our speakers this morning. I hope all of the press was able to get some good comments. We'd love to take a question or two if you guys have any. So at this point, please do one of two things. If you're a reporter with a question, either type it into the chat function and we can go ahead and read it for you. Go ahead and please list your what outlet you're with. That would be helpful as well. And secondly, you can also raise your hand and we can go ahead and just take your question personally. I know, Congresswoman, though, before we take any other questions, that we constantly hear a set of questions that come into our comment field on social media. And since we have the senator on the line this morning, perhaps you could run that by him.
Sure. Thank you so much. You know, Senator, I know I just did an interview over the weekend and talked about Jamie's Law, and I mentioned in my remarks, I regularly get asked, you know, Debbie, that's great. We agree with you, but you haven't even been able to move the other pieces of gun safety legislation. How are you going to move this one? So what would you say the prospects are in the Senate for getting a hearing on Jamie's Law?
I think the prospects are good for a hearing. I am going to be having a series of hearings, as a matter of fact, beginning in the next few weeks on red flag statutes, ghost guns, and other steps, specific steps. And there's no reason we can't have a hearing on the subcommittee on the Constitution, which is a subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee on Jamie's Law. And obviously, Fred would be a perfect witness for that kind of hearing. So a hearing is doable. What's more difficult, obviously, is passing any of these laws. And I feel this time is different because we have unprecedented momentum, largely due to the kind of activism and advocacy that we see from Brady, from individuals like Fred Guttenberg, the March for Our Lives students, Moms Demand Action, Students Demand Action, the network of grassroots groups that now have unparalleled power. And what we've also seen, and Chris alluded to it, is the imploding of the NRA. The NRA has declared bankruptcy in court. That's financial bankruptcy, but it's also morally bankrupt and quickly losing its grip on Congress. And what we need to do is follow the paths that we have, reaching out to our Republican colleagues, seeking the 60 votes that are necessary under current filibuster rules. I'm in favor of abolishing the filibuster. I've been in favor of it since my first day in the United States Senate. I voted to abolish it. I think it was my third vote. I'm in favor of reforming it if we can't abolish it. But in the meantime, working within that 60 rule requirement, we should be moving forward. And I am reaching out literally every day to Republican colleagues. And I'm finding that they are more open and receptive than ever to the idea of moving forward. Is that a guarantee we'll move forward on background checks? I can't predict with any certainty, but I think we're closer than ever. And let me just say, and it's a point you made, Debbie, it's already against the law for a felon, someone who's been adjudicated mentally ill, someone who is a drug addict or a domestic abuser, to buy ammunition. It's against the law. All we're saying here is that the law has to be enforced by a background check. And the 80, 90% of the American people who favor background checks for firearms certainly ought to be in favor of background checks for ammunition.
All right, thank you very much for everyone joining us today. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment. Congresswoman, would you like to say a couple closing words?
Just to wrap up and thank you everyone so much. As I said, you're looking at a group of people who will relentlessly, along with millions of our supporters, relentlessly continue to pursue making sure that we can keep people safe from guns and gun violence. Jamie's Law is one critical way that we can do that. At the end of the day, as the senator said, as I mentioned, this is already against the law. Sellers should not be selling ammunition to people who are prohibited from purchasing a gun under federal law. And we need to make sure there's enforcement. I will add that I'm confident that Congressman Deutch, and he may want to add something about the chances of getting a hearing, which is, slow and steady wins the race. Every inch we can push a boulder up the mountain is more progress that we've made. So I'm looking forward to getting a hearing in the House of Representatives for this legislation as well. And we're just going to keep going relentlessly until we succeed. Congressman Deutch, you want to close us out?
Listen, I'm so grateful to you, Debbie, and for leading this effort. Senator Blumenthal.
PLG has raised their hand. If you want to take it, great. If not, we can circle back.
Senator Blumenthal, we're incredibly appreciative and grateful to you for your leadership and the hearings you're going to be holding. The message that I would offer is, while we passed two important pieces of legislation and sent them over to the Senate, and you're moving forward on hearings, there is more work for us to do in the House. And that means hearings and votes on important pieces of legislation like Jamie's Law. That's what we intend to push forward on in the House. It is not sufficient for us to sit back and say we have done everything that we can, because we haven't, and this is a big step. This will be a big step forward. Look forward to working with you, Debbie, to make sure that happens.
Thank you so much. Actually, we do have a late breaking question from Channel 10 in South Florida, so we'll take that and then we'll close.
Hi, sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello? Sorry, I apologize. I put it in the chat, and I guess I don't know if you could see it, but you kind of have addressed the second part of my question when it comes to, I guess, feasibility. But this is a reintroduction, and forgive my ignorance. Can you tell me what happened to the previous piece of legislation? And then also, if there was this comprehensive bipartisan effort in the House, I believe it was back in March, why was this not included, or was it included as a part of that effort to try and quote unquote address this issue? And that's all. Thank you.
Sure. The answer to your first question is that the legislation was introduced and it did not move forward. So we're like thousands of pieces of legislation. So we're here to say that we're not going away, and we're going to, and especially now that we do have the White House as well as Democrats in the majority in both the House and the Senate. Like I said, with every passing year, with every continued effort, you have a chance to make more progress. And so this time we're in a different political situation than we were previously. We weren't expecting, frankly, when we introduced the bill with divided government and Donald Trump in the White House, that this bill would become law. But it was important to make sure we introduced it, that we called attention to it, and that we took a step forward. And so now we have more of an opportunity to take a step forward. And I can tell you, I've been a legislator for 28 years. And when you're a legislator, you delight in incremental change. And so that is how you can really make sure that you don't crack up, frankly, from frustration, and also that you understand that you make as much progress as you can. And when you can make progress when it comes to keeping people safe, that can save one life. If it saves one life, it saves 5 lives. If it could have prevented the loss of Jamie Guttenberg, because her killer wouldn't have been able to buy ammunition, then that was an opportunity missed and an opportunity lost and a life saved. So that's the direction that we're headed, and we're going to continue to push forward until we can achieve our goals. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for your
Thank
incredible
you.
leadership, and Ted and Fred and Kristin. Look forward to standing, someday standing, hopefully sooner rather than later, at the bill signing for Jamie's Law.
This year. Thank you.
This year.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Bye.